we go. And then we get to talk about another fun thing.
Okay, the last one was mildly concerning for me, but I think,
You're still here.
I'm still here. I'm still willing to learn, so...
I'm still willing to learn.
I'm still willing to learn. I'm still enthused to learn.
You're still enthused. Yeah. That's exactly where we want. I love that so much. That's all I could ever possibly ask and hope for. Do you think it would be better if it wasn't human bodies that we're talking about?
Maybe. The idea of, like, having a bunch of little worms inside my small intestines was, like... That was concerning, but maybe if it's are you talking like different
maybe like
species,
you don't
like
care
animal?
if it's in another species.
Like
Are you saying that?
Like maybe that would be less concerning for me.
Okay, well, we're also moving away from parasites. Tragic. To something a little bit more ambiguous on that scale of is it living, is it not living? To a type of cholera.
Okay.
Not the cholera that you've heard of. We're moving on to hog cholera.
Hog like pig?
Hog like hog.
Ooh.
Yeah, hog like hog cholera.
I eat those.
You do eat those.
I eat those. Ooh. Okay.
Don't worry about it. We've talked about this. We don't eat a lot of.
That's true, but
on
occasion.
But on occasion, when I do eat, I don't. Well.
Okay. No, I'm gonna.
We'll see. We'll see where we're at when we end this. Okay. So hog cholera. Now we call it classical swine fever. Because we don't want to call it hog cholera anymore. So, classical swine fever.
Classical swine fever.
Comes from a pestivirus from the Pestivirus family. I think I did that right.
Okay.
So, that is a family of positive, single-stranded RNA enveloped viruses.
Oh, so like tiny, virus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Virus.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Hog cholera. How far back was that? First thing?
Well, the first case in the United States was in 1833.
That's a ways.
That is a ways. But it's also not a ways. But it is a ways. So
in a way,
it's almost 200 years. But that doesn't feel like very long for history, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Classical swine fever, hog cholera. It comes from Pestivirus C. I won't be quizzing you on that.
Okay.
It's I just think that's.
Is there an A and a B?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And those are the other. I believe A is. I believe A and B are both bovine iterations of that virus.
Okay.
So we've kind of talked about this before, but there's that debate on living, non-living viruses. You know, whether or not they're alive, or not cells, not microbes like bacteria or fungi, which definitely alive.
Yeah.
So the simplest description of their life cycle is that the virus, because we're not talking about the people, we're talking about the bugs.
The bugs.
So and listen, I study history, so this is my very best attempt. I think the light went off again. Can you check it real quick?
Yeah.
It's off?
It's off.
I swear to fucking God. Cool. Well, I guess this is an entirely audio medium, and I'm really glad that we did set deck and cleaned your living room for it.
Yep.
I wouldn't worry about it. We're just going to be more clear into the mic, and I'm not going to show you any pictures.
Also, that is kind of... I'm wondering why... It wasn't even 30 minutes of...
No. I think it's just that the battery's probably not attaching, or the charger isn't working, or something is happening.
Maybe just bring it up with the people.
Yeah. I mean, it was barely turning on with them, so I'll charge the whole battery and I'll put it in there when I bring it back to them. I'll be like, listen, this thing was not staying on for more than 20 minutes, because it really wasn't. Cool. Okay. I study history. I don't study science, so this is really my best attempt to describe this to you. So please nobody take this for gospel. Please ask a STEM person. So their life cycle, the life cycle of a virus, enters the cell. Genome replication happens. It exits. So our little virus, it attaches to a host cell, penetrates the wall, sheds its capsid, that's the protective coat, takes its coat off, and then it can be used by the cell for replication. So after viral proteins and genomes have been made, they assemble together into a progeny virion particle. I hope I'm pronouncing
That is such a
things
big
correct.
sciencey word.
I know.
don't even...
It's 3 sciencey words, except
Oh my
particle.
God.
I think we got that one. And then they break out of the cell. So what exactly happens in each of those steps, how each virus accomplishes those objectives, it varies between DNA and RNA viruses. But basically, this little guy, he sneaks into the cell. He Mission Impossibles his way into the cell, through the cell wall, in his giant, like, trench coat with, like, he's
like
got, like, the bomb vest inside the trench coat. And then he takes it all off, and he looks at everything in the cell, and he goes, "You're all working for me now." And they have to replicate him. And then once he has an army, they can, like, pop the cell wall, usually killing it, and then bust out, and then spread out and do it to a bunch of other cells. Hog cholera, like we brought up before, because you asked, good job. It's been in the U.S. since 1833. So outbreaks of hog cholera have been reported in Casa Grande, Vail, Yuma, Nogales, Globe, and Tucson since 1897.
Oh.
Yeah. It's not too long ago.
Did we historically have a lot of like farm animals and like cattle down here specifically?
We
because in my head that sounds like a Texas like.
Yeah, Texas did have like big cattle and like swine agriculture, but they did also have a fair amount of that in Arizona. Arizona's still like a fairly like agricultural state. I mean, like every state has something, but like we weren't completely separated from that. Yeah, I don't know what the numbers are today, though. I cannot share. Yeah. So hog cholera, it affects the hogs differently in Arizona than it does in more humid climates, is what we do know about how it affects them here versus other places. So in Arizona, it was noted that cholera was more chronic and less active. Those are like important, like different factors there. So acute cholera is what would happen when it was like an active, when it was an active spread. So in acute cholera, it could cause the infected hog to die within a few days, but the chronic form of infection could just make them sick for like weeks to months before it finally passes. So with chronic hog cholera, only a couple animals at a time got sick, but they usually all died eventually. They did not recover. So during the wet months, winter and spring here, the disease would turn active and burn through a herd in as little as 1 week.
Jesus.
Yeah. But not all of them would die, but a lot of them would get sick.
And this is spread through.
It's a virus.
It's a virus,
yeah.
So you have to.
So think like bodily fluids, but then also like some potential for respiration, but mostly like bodily fluids. Like they're living in among each other's everything.
So it's like
yeah. Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, during the wet months, it was a little bit more prevalent in the active form. So in 1920, so a little bit after we had like our first big waves come through Arizona, the University of Arizona's College of Agriculture, yes way. It was I'm glad you're smiling, because I think that this is the coolest shit, is that I got to look at a bunch of our university's old agriculture documents. And that we have those. And yeah, how old did you think the U of A was? Because they were publishing shit in 1920.
Old Maine looks pretty old.
I don't think Old Maine is as old as we think it is. But yeah. So the College of Agriculture in, working with the USDA, they cooperated to distribute information about hog cholera to hog raisers in Arizona. So in 1920, the cause of hog cholera was still like completely unknown. And it could not be seen with the most like high-powered microscopes at the time, so they had like no way of like truly diagnosing. It was just symptomatic.
When did we learn about viruses and stuff? Like when was that?
This is our new fun segment. Let's Google that. You have to make background music while I Google things. Some viruses were discovered in like 1892. I don't know if that's true for it being the very first one. But that is, we can say when the microscopes were good enough for us to finally see them. and then start determining that this was a thing that was separate from other things that we'd seen that were larger.
So you said 1892. 1892. So
which is just shortly, after it came to the United States, after hog cholera came to the United States, but just before we started getting outbreaks in Arizona, and then about 20-ish years before this U of A College of Agriculture publication. So we'd seen it by then.
Okay, but then it was like,
yeah. So, but it still wasn't really know what the cause of it was. Like, we knew the virus, but like we didn't know how it could be transmitted, around. And like cholera as like a virus, like wasn't necessarily able to be seen with those microscopes. They did know though that it could be transmitted animal to animal through. This is a quote because I don't know, and like obviously quote is ambiguous because you can say things, but like full quote because interesting. Blood and excretions. And I say quote because excretions is a very general word.
It's very loose, yeah.
It's a loose term, but that is the word that the U of A used in that publication. They said blood and excretions, so take that for what you will.
That can like include, because
so
sweat is
things.
like an excretion, right?
I mean, you can't see me shrugging, but I'm shrugging. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the hog becomes infected. They refuse to eat. They appear depressed, which is sad.
Sad pig syndrome.
Sad pig syndrome. No, it really is sad.
Oh, man.
And then they get stiff and sore, and that makes them walk funny. So they get less mobile because they can't like move their joints around so good. And then they can develop these purple spots on their belly and flanks. Where's your flanks?
Wait. I'm freaking out, man.
You can't see, but Jack is visibly sweating.
I want to say, I'm trying to think, like the cut of meat flank. Where is it? I don't know. Okay, where is the flank?
Your sides. Yeah, your flanks, your sides.
Your flank. Wait, that makes.
It wasn't important.
Wait, names make sense.
It wasn't important for me to test you on that. I just thought it'd be fun.
Okay.
So on their belly
but on their belly and their flanks,
they get purple spots. And right before they die, those spots spread to their nose and their ears. We know where those are. And they instinctively, when that happens, or towards the end of this infection cycle, towards the end of their life, they instinctively isolate themselves in like corners. They walk really unsteadily because they're really weak. They also might develop a cough and diarrhea in the later stages of infection. And they get those purple spots. Those turn into ulcers. And their skin gets really rough, and then it can get gangrenous around the ulcers. Do you know what gangrenous? Do we need definition? Yes, but do we know? It means it's dead. Yeah. It hurts like it's necrotic.
So it's got dead spots of skin?
Yeah, it's necrotic skin. Around the ulcers. Or it can become gangrenous, but they're just like ulcers, which are just like big open sores. But those ulcers weren't a feature of chronic cholera, just the acute cholera. So the active, when it would spread like rapidly, but not the like longer term when they're sick for a long time.
What?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if you already talked about this, but is acute and chronic two different viruses, or is it the same one? It's just how it affects the animal?
I believe it's the same one. Time of year makes it spread differently.
Okay.
Or like can live longer. Different things like that is what I understand. Don't quote me, because I don't know. I don't know.
Quote me.
I don't know. Never quote me. I don't know STEM things. But if that's what I was able to understand from that U of A report, was that they spread differently during that time of year, but it's still the same that virus. It's what did we determine? It's Pestivirus C.
Okay.
Still the whole way through. Yeah. So they're losing weight. They're losing their strength consistently until they finally pass. So unfortunately, young pigs are at a greater risk for the deadly infections. Because they're a little bit weaker already and they're smaller. So it was believed to be transmitted at this time by, before we figured out the pig to pig transmission, like, which we knew was happening. But we believed it could also be transmitted for a while by like birds, dogs, cat, like farm equipment, like tools, that it could be transmitted by feed, by people, by dust, manure, mud, anything that's like carrying the dried excretions to different places, and of course like the hog to hog. And it was noticed that hog cholera spread more rapidly in unsanitary spaces or when the hogs were not provided with a sufficient diet. So stagnant water and litter were also considered to be like contributors to hog cholera by the USDA in 1920. The largest spread of hog cholera was a result of uncooked garbage being fed to pigs, which, did you know that you have to feed the garbage before you feed it to pigs? I didn't know that.
You have to, oh man.
Yeah.
Just like have a garbage oven, or? That's a question for another day. Now that's a whole
question for Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs, not me.
Episode 600, garbage oven.
I think they did have an episode when I was a kid. I feel like I remember watching the How Do Pigs Get Fed episode from like the Las Vegas buffets.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but I don't remember cooking. I mostly just remember the having to sort out like actual trash from food.
Right.
Anyways, the best method of preventing the spread of hog cholera was to quarantine new hogs before you introduce them to the rest of the herd. This is still super common practice with a lot of livestock and farm animals today to prevent and monitor a lot of different diseases. Like, have you seen the videos where people bring the baby cows to live with them inside the house before they take them outside?
Oh,
they're quarantining the cow.
Wait, yeah. I thought that was just for cow fun.
It's also for TikTok clicks, but you do have to quarantine the cow, and sometimes that's what they're doing. So, and you have to do that with a lot of different animals. Because when you get them, you have to make sure they don't have any diseases that could be communicable to the rest of your farm animals. So that was the main prevention. But it was still happening. So it was recommended also that these like hog raisers disinfect their pens once a month at least with carbolic acid, so more phenol, welcome back phenol, and water, and dust the ground with air-slaked lime, which is calcium hydroxide.
Isn't that like not good for this?
Totally.
Okay.
Yes. And these disinfecting practices were recommended to be done a couple times a week if you knew that your herd was infected. So, keep it cleaner while there is infection to hopefully keep things from spreading even further. So the USDA and the University of Arizona College of Agriculture also recommended burning the dead or burying them very deep and covering them with quicklime to prevent the spread of germs. So that was also happening. But first and foremost,
yes,
these same organizations pushed that it was the responsibility of all stockmen to provide their hogs with anti-cholera serums as soon as they noticed any sign of infection.
Which were like the serums?
It was like medication.
It was like actual. It wasn't
medication.
Just like
no, it wasn't garbage. No, it wasn't the Thymol from the corpse.
Okay.
Yeah, this was actual medication. But they also made sure that hog raisers knew about the vaccine and argued that it was less expensive and less wasteful because then you don't have to kill infected hogs or let them die. To get the vaccine, especially because there's an 80% chance they would not improve if they got sick, and then a near guarantee that they would spread the disease and do damage to the rest of the herd. So in 1920, a vaccine did exist for hog cholera.
Wow.
And it was recommended that young pigs be vaccinated as soon as they were weaned, so as soon as they stopped eating off mama.
I was gonna. Okay.
Yeah. And they had the highest likelihood of catching, because, they had the highest likelihood of catching and dying from this, so they were recommended to be vaccinated as soon as possible. So this same study, same one, thank you, U of A College of Agriculture, it noticed that farmers were typically not vaccinating early enough and that they ordered vaccines after outbreaks already started, which is not...
That's not how that
that's
works.
Not effective. So ordering serums and ordering vaccines to vaccinate as the infection is already moving through the crowd is not as effective as preemptive vaccinations.
Here's a question. How regular were, like, vaccines amongst just people at that... Like... So now we get, like, a flu vaccine, like, every season. But, like, back then, how prevalent were vaccines? Just
people were still getting vaccinated for a couple different things, but there was also vaccines still being developed for, like, more diseases. But
was it was like a new... How new was it?
Like, inoculation had been around for a long time.
Okay.
But then we developed, like, I think it was the smallpox vaccine was the first one. This is our new favorite segment. Kid's gonna Google it while Jack makes music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. So the smallpox vaccine was in like 1721.
Okay.
So
they know about vaccines.
Yeah. So I was like, no. They were. Didn't you watch the John Adams miniseries with us when you were a kid? Didn't you have to watch them getting the inoculations?
Yeah. They know that, like, vaccines
are preventative. Yes. People were well aware that vaccines
were preventative. Just like...
But, you could still get the now, like, we're still getting the COVID vaccine a little bit later than we would maybe other times. And it's still effective and happening. So, like, even though the virus, it's, like, all around us, getting it at any point is still more helpful than not getting it at all. So that's kind of what was happening here, is that the initial investment was something that people didn't really want to put in, and then it would happen, and they'd go like, I gotta vaccinate all these pigs, like, So nationwide eradication efforts were mounted in the United States, or they were mounted by the United States Livestock Sanitary. I've said so many words. United States Livestock Sanitary Association in 1951, so that's a while later. But those eradication efforts didn't truly even start until the 1960s. Okay. So why do we care that these pigs are getting cholera? Other than that, like, they're dying and we feel bad and we don't want that to happen.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
We do eat pork.
We do, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Is that...
But we're not eating hog cholera. However, it was contributing to about, a reported $50 million in annual losses to hog raisers in the first half of the 20th century. So,
half.
1900 to 1950. That's annual losses. Just because of the amount of pigs that were dying and the amount that had to be spent on medications. So that's how much they were not making in the, like, hog raising community. That they would, that they were projected to have earned. So in the early 60s, so we're shooting a little bit later. We're going a little bit closer to modern times. The Secretary of Agriculture responded to a request for federal support for the eradication of hog cholera, and he found that the cost of hog cholera in the United States at that time, so in the 60s, was $40 to $60 million per year in losses. Wow. So since a lot of these hogs were destined to be sold internationally, because we do send a lot of our meat overseas, while the cost of an eradication program would cost, like, maybe 10 million max, we were losing 40 to 60 million per year. By the 60s.
Why are we not doing this?
Exactly. So he was like, oh my god, we gotta eradicate hog cholera. Like yesterday. So in September of 1961, who was the president in 1961? Nope, you know this one.
I don't.
You know this one.
I don't, though.
What had 11, 22, 63, what
You're saying numbers and I'm thinking about math equations, so don't ask me about...
President John F. Kennedy.
Okay.
It's okay. It's fine.
I don't have a calendar in my mind.
I don't have a calendar.
It's just like
I don't either.
Numbers and
I don't either. I just remember conspiracy theory dates. So President John F. Kennedy, if you didn't know anything, did you know anything that he did as a president besides, like, we will get men to the moon? And I don't remember that.
Is he the one that, like, hoarded a bunch of cigars right before?
I don't know nothing about that.
Okay, never mind.
I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say I don't know nothing about that.
Okay.
But so now you know one more thing that John F. Kennedy definitely did do. He signed an act to fund the National Hog Cholera Eradication Program.
Okay.
So now when
Okay, yes.
which passed through Congress with overwhelming support because they're like, we got to get this pig money back into the American economy.
Right.
We got to send these pigs overseas. We got to send these men to the moon.
Men to moon, pig overseas.
men to moon, pigs overseas. So 1.5 million farms in the United States had pigs. Not every single pig at every farm could be tested, you know. So data on how prevalent swine fever was relied on farmers reporting sick pigs that could be tested. So yeah, you had to report in order for us to find out what was going on in the numbers and the data. So data mixed because it relies on reporting.
Mm-hmm.
We can't know what we can't see, and we can't go to every farm. We can't go to all 1.5 million farms.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of farms. So this meant that vets had to be trained to diagnose hog cholera specifically, and some did this as their exclusive work, and they traveled across the U.S. as quickly as possible at the drop of a hat to diagnose, hopefully, quarantined hogs. So farms with hog cholera were quarantined, and then regulations surrounding interstate livestock travel and sale became really formalized. Hogs were preemptively vaccinated, and public service announcements encouraged people to cook any garbage they intended to feed their hogs. Many of the public service announcements surrounding cholera from the 19th century to its eradication in the late 1970s emphasized the cost effectiveness of vaccination and outbreak reporting to individual hog raisers as the primary motivation for eradicating hog cholera. So we don't care about the bug. We don't care about the pig. We care about the money.
That's what really got people moving.
Very, very clear in this situation.
Okay.
Yeah. And so in 1978, after a 15-year-long eradication campaign,
Jeez.
the United States declared itself hog cholera free. But it still exists outside of the U.S.
Oh, so just here.
So just here. It exists outside the U.S. in countries that we trade with, so it is surveilled very heavily, and we still do quarantine. So ads for hog cholera treatments, because we were talking a lot, there was public health campaigns and a lot of discussion about, like, it is your fault if you get hog cholera, and don't you bring that over here to my pigs. So ads for hog cholera treatments claimed that the loss of hog cholera amounts to like 15 million annually in the U.S. like in 1908. That's what they were putting the number as. So I know we've challenged the number a couple different times. There's been a couple different reports throughout history of like what that number is. It was a lot more in the 60s, and the average number between 1900 and 1950 was supposed to be 10 million. This report from the Winslow Mail in Arizona in 1908 said that it was 15 million annually in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And they said a satisfactory remedy is the words. A satisfactory remedy is of the utmost interest to farmers. While this method has been patented by Dr. M. Dorset of the Bureau of Animal Industry, it has been thrown open to the free use of farmers in the United States. So they're like, remedy this in your hog pens. You need to clear them of hog cholera.
This is teaching me so many like new institutions I didn't even know existed. Like the Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, dude, you just wait. We're gonna get to so many different. I'm so excited.
Okay.
I can't wait to tell you about different facets of government.
Dude, I don't even.
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool. But so the Bureau of Animal Industry patented this like remedy for hog cholera, according to the Winslow Mail. That was in 1908. But inoculation for it was being recommended by the Coconino Weekly Sun in 1894. These are all Arizona publications.
Is that the Flagstaff?
That is Flagstaff.
Okay.
Oh, he remembered from bookworms. I love it. Yeah. So we're talking about it. It's around Arizona Republican in 1896. a Professor Stowe-Deval of the Agricultural Experiment Station of Tucson in 1896. So before we published that U of A thing. Their public health announcement about hog cholera, it's not a thing. So he was discussing swine plague as the second annual session of Arizona Agricultural Association. So he went to the Agricultural Association. He's talking about swine plague, which is a different.
I was gonna
ask. It is different but similar. Those are they were attributing the illness to a bacteria, not a virus, because older microscopes were able to identify bacteria because they're a lot larger than viruses, which I hope answers your question from earlier.
Yes.
So we could see bacterial infections in microscopes a long time before we could see viruses because they're so whittle bitty. And so this guy was claiming that the disease that was killing hogs in a large number was not hog cholera, but was a different swine plague that only happened in the winter months. And not the same thing that was affecting pigs in the summer months. Any idea why we thought that? We've talked about it so far.
Does it have anything to do with? Well, is this the kind of like how we talked about it in hookworms, where it was like south? But you said more in the winter.
Mm-hmm. So more in the wet months versus the sunny months.
Right.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask if it was like a moisture thing.
Mm-hmm. Kind of, because we talked about I know this was like a whole 15 minutes ago. But they had that, remember, acute versus chronic.
Right.
Yeah. So they look a lot different, and they happen seasonally very differently in Arizona. So this guy was arguing that it wasn't the same illness. He was trying to say that he thought they were different because they presented differently. Now we know it was the same, but he was also saying that one was a different disease because swine plague is a different disease than hog cholera. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that people were arguing that it was they were completely different illnesses coming through just because they presented so differently here than they did in some other places.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That was my initial thought. I was like, I don't know, they sound different, but if they're the same, I guess a lot of different factors can contribute to how a disease affects. Okay,
tons of different factors.
But yeah, okay.
But I think this is interesting, even though the potential for swine plague is definitely present in Arizona.
Yeah.
And then 1915, Arizona Republican again. Which I'm not going to ask you who the governor of Arizona was in 1915. But his name was George W.P. Hunt. Now you know. He prohibited the importation of animals and livestock to the state to prevent the spread of hog cholera and also foot and mouth in cattle. So any livestock being moved through the state by train could only exit the train into designated quarantined pens, and any train cars with livestock unloaded had to get disinfected. Same way that we talked about the pens with all that stuff that's real scary.
Stuff,
Which they also talked about in the Coconino Sun in 1915. The Coconino Sun in 1915. So a lot of different publications which happens a lot. The newspapers around this time period, they will republish the same sort of speeches and articles in different ways. So that of course that quarantine and the prohibition on the importation of animals was reported widely. That happened in 1915. A little before that, though, there was an article in the Arizona Republican that identified, or according to them at the time, identified a major cause of hog cholera as feeding on sour swill, grain or corn distillery slop, the essence of the sourness being a vinegar which is formed in the food after the alcoholic fermentation has had its run. So not really, but yes. We knew it was coming from the food. We had an idea that it was coming from the food. We didn't really know how, but we knew that the bad food and sour slop was affecting
what
pigs.
Is you keep saying the garbage they feed.
Yes.
Is it what kind of is actual garbage?
So in this situation, they're talking about grain that's being fed to them that's gone sour. So grain and corn, or refuse from like grain and corn agricultural production. Time machine forward.
This was what year?
That one was published in 1891.
Okay,
so we knew something was happening,
but not exactly what.
We were trying. We were getting somewhere. So back forward again. I'm so sorry to be jumping around in time. 1916. You can see newspapers start to publish basically public health things, encouraging hog raisers to inoculate against the hog cholera as soon as you can, or as soon as hog cholera is identified within 2 miles of your farm. So if you can't inoculate them as soon as they're weaned, inoculate as soon as it is like within your general radius before it gets to you. So those vaccinations or those inoculations in 1916, they lasted for 2 to 3 months and had to be performed by a trained vet. And they only cost, at the time, about 40 cents per average-sized hog. So the vaccination was priced according to the size of the pig that it was being given to. They were trying to say, please do this. It's, it will save you money in the long run. And there was other newspapers that blamed hog raisers who didn't vaccinate or inoculate their pigs for causing infection or becoming like centers of infection. And that same article that was from Nogales International a little bit later, they talk about it's actually called it's a subsection of the newspaper called Health Hints for Livestock, prepared by the American Health Hints. Just, we won't tell you what to do, we'll give you hints. Which is like,
guys.
I know that's not what they're actually doing, but I like the implication.
Yeah.
That like we're just gonna make vague suggestions
and you do with it what you will.
But sometimes like they were really vague. I read a couple of them and it was interesting. But anyways, this one was less vague. And these were written by the American Foundation for Animal Health, so they were published in a couple different newspapers, I'm guessing. So it identifies hog cholera as a potent virus, and says that it's causing over 20 million to 60 million in like losses per year. So very big ranges of like losses we're projecting across time, and even in like different like years, these are being like discussed in very different broad ranges. And I'm sure there's a consistent number, but it's interesting that it's being reported so generally. But they're saying that these losses could be prevented if all farmers had their pigs vaccinated against cholera around weaning time. So we're still pushing this, and they're getting very aggressive towards hog raisers who are like, quote, willing to take the chance of like infecting their neighbor's swine. There's a lot more like articles about from like and there's USDA bulletins that get posted about how to dispose of diseased animals with like deep burying, lime, and burning. And one of those was kind of gross. It was from the Snips and St. John's Herald in 1904. It said, "It is almost no trouble to burn a hog, a few sticks of wood and a quart of coal oil being sufficient to start the carcass to consuming itself," which just gnarly. It's like, it's not a big deal, just do it, protect the other things. But it's like, that's a lot. That's a lot. So and then there was a publication in 1920, still Arizona, that said losing 75 hogs is equivalent to $1,500. And then like another one said that like it costs like $265 per hog that you lose. So it was just very like numbers that I couldn't really follow very well, that I was really trying to follow. Benson Signal, Tombstone Epitaph, they all in like 1916 started posting about hog cholera causing a loss of 1 billion pounds of pork per year, and that's so much.
1 billion pounds.
1 billion, and that directly affects beef production. Because if you're not eating 1 billion pounds of pig, you're still eating 1 billion pounds of something. And also because cattle raising depends on hog raising, because hogs follow the cattle, they eat after the cattle, and combined they bring the farmer a good revenue. So with, both of these newspapers had the same article. They said, with hog raising left out, the cattle in these states can only be grown at a loss. So not only are we needing to eat more of something, we're growing them at a loss because we don't have the pigs to follow them to, do the trade of the pigs eating the, So, pigs at this time, you were asked before, and I didn't have a number for you. $15 for the total per pig.
So 40 cents is actually a pretty
and this one is in 1916 in a different part of Arizona, and it says that you can inoculate a $15 hog for 25 cents. And they said, and I quote, not the full quote, but they said that's just good business. With hog cholera under control, they said, not only would we have more pork, but more beef. If hog cholera can be abolished, the United States in 2 years, this is where you can play the national anthem behind me. If hog cholera can be abolished, the United States in 2 years can be restored to its old place as the greatest meat exporting nation in the world.
In the world.
In the world.
Out of all of them, here the most.
Greatest exporter of meat.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess we do got a lot of land.
We did.
We got so much.
We got somebody's land.
Oh my god.
Yeah. And then in 1918, so just a touch after that one, saying we need to fix this so that we can continue to export meat, because this is now not only affecting our ability to export pork, but our ability to export beef. So just a touch after that, Bisbee Daily Review again has this giant ad from the Johnson Meat Company, featuring the stamp against infected meats, so that consumers can look out for government inspected meats again that were inspected against hog cholera and bovine tuberculosis. So government inspectors and veterinary experts looking for potentially diseased hogs and cattle in slaughterhouses. Or they would be looking for them in slaughterhouses to prevent the sale of infected meats. So you were worried before about, am I going to eat hog cholera? No, they're looking for it. That is what all those little logos on the meat packages you get mean. They're different levels of certification for a lot of different things. Disease is one of them. It's one of the subtitles to one of those stamps is that, don't worry, we check for disease. They were trying to prevent the sale of infected meats, but meats without the stamp could be cheaper.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
So, as far as stopping this, didn't go as far as they'd hoped.
Eventually it did.
Eventually, but
1978 it did.
But immediately there's still ways to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is hog cholera.
That is quite interesting. I'm glad to know that.
I mean, it's hog cholera.
It's hog cholera, but
yeah.
I'm glad to know it's not that big of a problem here. At least not that big of a issue.
Yeah, no, not here. We fixed it. We got it. We still got vaccinations. We still know how to handle it. Yeah.
Yeah. Where else even is that a big problem? China.
There's different forms of swine fever, but they're all across Asia, Europe, and the Caribbean, and then South America, and then also now Australia, we saw.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spiked concerns about their potential to enter the United States, but we're real good at keeping it out. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's hog cholera.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Yep.
Yep. That is.
That's all.
That's
all. We fixed it when it became an economic problem for the pork industry.
We didn't really care, apparently, about the pit.
No, we were fine for animals to die and to burn them and stuff. But it was when it became recognized as an economic.
$40 million deficit.
Yeah, somewhere between $10 and $60 million.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, that's when we started
when
to
it was
care.
An issue.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. And then if you take anything away from this, if anyone brings up John F. Kennedy around you can be like, JFK eradicated
it's the guy that did the cigar thing and the hog cholera thing.
Yep, there you go.
Not anything else.
You'll be the coolest guy at the party. Who's Marilyn Monroe? I don't know anything about that.